Today, we are diving deep into one of the most important books ever written on economics, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. We're going to break down his classic arguments on free trade, the ideas that completely flipped the script back in his day, and honestly are still at the center of huge debates today. All right, let's jump right in.
So, at the very heart of Smith's entire work is this one really powerful question. Is it better for a country to just build walls around itself, protect its own industries, and try to make absolutely everything at home? Or should it open up and trade freely with the rest of the world? I mean, this was the economic puzzle of the 18th century, and it's a question that you can still hear echoing in basically every trade negotiation that happens today.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the system Smith was actually arguing against, what he called the domestic monopoly. Then we'll unpack his most famous idea, the invisible hand, and lay out his brilliantly simple case for free trade. But Smith wasn't some dogmatic thinker. So we'll look at the nuance, when he thought protectionism was a good idea, and when it called for some serious political judgment. We'll wrap up with his surprisingly realistic take on whether true free trade could ever actually happen.
Okay, first things first, let's set the scene. To really get how radical Smith's ideas were, you have to understand the world he was living in, the system he was trying to challenge. Back in his day, it was just normal for governments to actively block foreign competition. It was seen as giving a leg up to the industries right there at home.
Smith had a name for this, the monopoly of the home market. And yeah, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. By slapping high taxes or duties on goods coming from other countries, or sometimes just banning them outright, the government basically handed domestic producers a captive audience. They didn't have to worry about anyone else making cheaper or better stuff.
And this wasn't just some abstract theory, it was happening all around him. Smith pointed to real examples in Great Britain. Cattle farmers shielded from foreign beef, corn growers protected from foreign grain, and of course the big, powerful manufacturers of wool, silk, and linen. They all had these cozy, government-backed monopolies. It meant their fellow Brits had to buy from them.
So you have this entrenched system. What was Smith's big counterargument? Well, it was an idea so powerful it would literally change how we think about economics. This concept that individual ambition, almost by accident, could lead to the best outcome for everybody.
Smith starts with a really honest, maybe even brutally honest observation about people. He says, look, when someone has money to invest, they aren't thinking about how to improve society or boost the national economy. No, they're just looking for the best possible return for themselves. Their motive is personal gain. It's that simple.
And here it is, the brilliant twist. Smith argues that while that person is just pursuing their own profit, they are led by an invisible hand to benefit all of society. In fact, he famously says that people often do more good for everyone when they're just chasing their own self-interest than when they are actively trying to do good for the public.
So how does this invisible hand actually, work? Smith breaks it down logically. First, he says people generally like to invest their money close to home. It just feels safer, more secure. Second, to get the biggest profit, they'll naturally put that money into whatever industry is making the most valuable stuff. And when every individual is doing that, all at once, the collective result is that the nation's entire economic output gets maximized. And nobody even planned it that way.
Now let's see how Smith builds this into a really airtight, common-sense argument for free trade. He doesn't just stick with these big theories, he brings it right down to earth with these simple analogies that are almost impossible to argue with.
Just take his example of a tailor and a shoemaker. It would be crazy for the tailor to stop making clothes to try and hammer out his own pair of shoes, right? And it would be just as silly for the shoemaker to try and weave his own coat. It's obviously better for both of them to just stick to what they're good at and trade with each other. It's the simple power of specialization.
And this leads to Smith's real mic drop moment. He takes that basic common sense and scales it up to the level of a country. He says, if every single family understands that it's smart to buy something if someone else can make it cheaper, why on earth would that same logic be foolish for an entire kingdom? If another country can supply you with something for less than it costs you to make it, you're always better off buying it from them. Period.
He really drives this point home with an unforgettable image. Sure, you could technically build a bunch of fancy greenhouses in Scotland and grow grapes to make wine, but it would cost you 30 times more than just importing perfectly good wine from France. Forcing people to buy Scottish-made wine through tariffs would be, in his words, a manifest absurdity. It's a powerful argument, but he wasn't done just yet. And this part is absolutely crucial if you want to understand Adam Smith's real genius. He was not some blind free trade fanatic. He was a pragmatist. He carefully pointed out specific situations where, actually, the logic of free trade should take a back seat and where protectionist policies are not just okay but genuinely wise. Smith points to two clear-cut cases where tariffs actually make sense. The first, and most important, is national defense. If an industry is vital for the country's security, especially in wartime, you protect it. The second is just about basic fairness. If you tax a product that's made at home, it's only right to put the exact same tax on that product when it's imported from somewhere else. His big example for the defense exception was Britain's famous active navigation. I mean, this was pure protectionism. It demanded that trade with British colonies and along the coast had to be done on British ships staffed by British sailors. The goal here wasn't economic efficiency at all. It was purely strategic. It was meant to cripple the naval power of the Dutch, who were Britain's main rival at the time.
So here's the key takeaway. Smith knew this law was actually bad for pure economic growth, for opulence, or wealth, as he called it. It deliberately made trade more expensive and less efficient. But he concluded, because national defense is just so much more important than wealth, the active navigation was probably the wisest commercial law England ever passed.
Okay, so beyond those clear-cut advantages, Smith identified two sort of grayer areas. These weren't slam-dunk cases for protectionism, but they were complex situations that really required the careful deliberation and political skill of a leader. The first is retaliation. You know, if another country hits your products with tariffs, do you hit them back? The second is the human cost of making big changes. If an industry has been protected for years and employs thousands and thousands of people, Smith argues that just basic humanity says you have to remove those protections slowly to avoid suddenly throwing a great multitude of hands out of work. And on that idea of retaliation, Smith is extremely cautious. He says that deciding whether or not to start a trade war, well, that's not a question for economic science. It really comes down to the skill of what he called that insidious and crafty animal, a statesman or politician. Hitting back with tariffs is only a good idea if you have a real shot at making the other country back down. If not, you're just punishing your own people with higher prices for no reason. This brings us to our final section, and it's kind of a sobering twist. After building this incredibly elegant and powerful case for free trade, Adam Smith basically admits that he's deeply pessimistic that it could ever really fully happen. So what stood in the way? He saw two huge roadblocks. First, just the general prejudices of the public. But the much bigger obstacle, he argued, was the private interests of the merchants and manufacturers themselves. Think about it. The people getting rich from these protectionist policies will fight tooth and nail to keep them. They form powerful lobbies that can bully and intimidate politicians into doing what they want. And this is his final, pretty stark conclusion. To believe that perfect, totally free trade could ever be achieved, well, that's just as naive as expecting a perfect utopian society to just pop up. The messy reality of politics and powerful private interests, he figured, would always get in the way. And that leaves us with a really provocative final thought. Almost 250 years after Adam Smith laid all this out, nations are still locked in these fierce debates over tariffs and trade wars and protectionism. So it really makes you ask, right? Was his logic for free trade correct? And maybe more importantly, was his deep pessimism about the politics of it all even more prophetic? Are we still just chasing a utopian dream?